A child stood at the service counter of Liberty Trust Financial, 10 years old, his second-hand jacket draped over his thin shoulders like a tent, several sizes too large with sleeves that had been rolled up repeatedly just so his small hands could emerge. But what really caught attention were his sneakers. The soles had split open in multiple places from thousands of steps on harsh city sidewalks. The shoelaces had been knotted together so many times they looked more like rope than laces, desperately holding the shoes together for just one more week. These weren't just old shoes. They were a story written in cracked leather and worn rubber, a story of going without, a story of making things last far beyond their intended lifespan, a story of a childhood where brand new anything was a luxury reserved for other families. The child's voice came out soft but steady when he finally spoke to the bank employee. "Excuse me, I need to check my account balance." The branch supervisor paused in the middle of his stride. He pivoted slowly, his gaze traveling methodically from the child's tattered footwear upward to his anxious face. This supervisor's tailored suit probably carried a price tag exceeding the combined value of everything the child possessed. His Italian leather shoes caught the light from the ornate chandeliers suspended from the high ceiling like captured sunlight. For several heartbeats, nothing but quiet filled the space. The distant hum of air conditioning, the soft clicking of keyboards at workstations, the whisper of paperwork being organized at faraway desks. Then the supervisor erupted into laughter. Not a subtle chuckle or an awkward throat clearing. A genuine, resonating laugh that ricocheted off the polished stone floors and bounced against the high walls. Other patrons turned their heads. Several smiled in response. A handful joined in, their amusement spreading across the banking floor like a contagious epidemic. "Check your account," the supervisor's words carried through Liberty Trust Financial like a stage performer projecting to the back row. "Son, this is Liberty Trust Financial, not a social services office, not some community handout center. We cater to legitimate account holders here." The supervisor moved closer, violating the child's personal space. His designer fragrance dominated the air around them, a stark contrast to the contempt radiating from his expression. He bent forward, positioning himself so the child could see his own frightened face reflected in the man's expensive eyeglasses. "Just look at those shoes," the supervisor went on, his tone saturated with scorn. "Look at the state of you. Just another street urchin hunting for charity, I imagine. Your type is predictable. Always with your hand out, always wanting something for nothing, never giving anything back to society." A patron wearing high-end fashion stood waiting at the third teller window. Her sharp voice cut through the space behind them. "Would someone please remove him? He's lowering the standards of this establishment. I pay significant fees for premier services, not to queue alongside vagrant children." Additional laughter spread across the lobby. It moved from patron to patron, touching the affluent businessman reviewing his portfolio, the well-dressed young couple establishing a shared account, even several bank staff members who attempted to conceal their smirks behind their palms. The uniformed guard positioned near the main entrance adjusted his stance, his palm drifting unconsciously toward the equipment on his belt. A young professional in business casual attire extracted his smartphone and began filming. This was premium content material, banking confrontation, strong engagement potential, easy viral trajectory. Nobody defended the child. Not a single voice rose to offer protection. Not one adult human in that marble temple of commerce thought to extend even fundamental courtesy. Yet nobody could have predicted what would unfold within the next 60 minutes. Before the hour concluded, the supervisor himself would be brought to his knees, not pleading for funds, pleading for compassion, pleading for his livelihood, pleading for absolution that would remain forever out of reach. The child didn't flee, he didn't weep, he didn't create a disturbance or lose composure. Instead, he maintained his position exactly as his grandmother had trained him, exactly as they had rehearsed countless times in their modest apartment, conditioning him for a society that would render judgment before he uttered his first syllable. "Sir," the child repeated, his voice wavering but maintaining its core strength. "I'm an account holder here. My grandmother established it for me. She died 8 weeks ago. She left me this documentation." From within his oversized jacket, the child extracted a manila folder. The corners showed wear from repeated handling. The paper bore slight creases, suggesting it had been accessed and sealed numerous times, examined and re-examined during the lonely nighttime hours when sorrow felt most crushing. The contents included official paperwork, account records, transfer documentation, legal instruments establishing custody and succession, a debit card, and correspondence pennied in trembling script by an elderly woman aware her remaining time was limited. A letter from a grandmother determined to shield her grandson even beyond her final breath. The supervisor's eyes rolled with exaggerated drama. He scanned the assembled patrons, entertaining his spectators like a performer commanding center stage. "Your grandmother," he articulated, extending each word with mockery. "Allow me to predict the remainder of this fantasy. She additionally bequeathed you an estate, corporate aircraft, perhaps a luxury watercraft, an offshore account in the Caymans." The prosperous patrons appreciated the entertainment. They chuckled knowingly, trading meaningful glances. This provided diversion, a respite from the tedium of their financial transactions. The head teller, an employee who'd served the bank for more than 10 years, leaned across her workspace. Her expression twisted with barely masked revulsion. "Sir," she addressed the supervisor, "shall I contact law enforcement? This minor is transparently attempting some variety of fraud. We've encountered this previously. Street children appropriating documents, impersonating beneficiaries, attempting to penetrate accounts belonging to others." The supervisor gestured dismissively, savoring the moment too thoroughly to terminate it prematurely. "Not immediately. Let's observe what variety of scheme this little criminal is executing. Entertainment preceding expulsion, as the expression goes." He yanked the folder from the child's grasp forcefully, sufficient force that the youngster staggered backward. The supervisor withdrew the documents with theatrical impatience, his eyes scanning them with disinterested disdain. Account records, transfer documentation, legal papers bearing official stamps and authorized signatures, everything appeared authentic, minimally on superficial examination. Then he noticed the debit card tucked within. His movements froze. The card was Obsidian, elite category, Diamond Premier. The classification Liberty Trust issued exclusively to ultra-high net worth clientele. The type accompanied by a personal account manager, lifestyle services, global travel privileges, and admission to exclusive private lounges internationally. The classification demanding a minimum account balance in 6 figures merely to qualify. For precisely 3 seconds, something shifted across the supervisor's features. Bewilderment, uncertainty, a fracture in his complete conviction. His attention moved from the card to the child's deteriorating footwear and returned, attempting to reconcile what he observed with what he presumed to be reality. However, bigotry is an intoxicating substance. It can obscure truth even when truth confronts you directly, documented on legitimate bank records, encoded in a diamond card's data stripe. The supervisor dismissed his uncertainty like moisture off protective outerwear. He raised the card high, rotating to display it to the lobby like an attorney presenting evidence during trial. "An underprivileged minority child possessing a Diamond Premier card," he proclaimed to the watching audience. "Does everyone comprehend this? The presumption never fails to astound me. He genuinely anticipates us believing this wasn't stolen property." The child's hands quivered at his sides. His voice fractured when he responded, yet he refused to avert his gaze. "I didn't steal anything. It belongs to me. My grandmother accumulated savings throughout her entire existence. She maintained 3 employment positions simultaneously. She never purchased anything for her own benefit. Every resource went toward my education account. Every cent existed for my benefit." "Your grandmother," the supervisor's voice elevated with theatrical astonishment, "your grandmother accumulated nothing. People from your background don't accumulate. You accept government subsidies and squander them on gambling and intoxicants. That's the pattern with your demographic. He hurled the card onto the counter surface with theatrical flair. It skated across the buffed marble, rotating twice before settling near the boundary. The black polymer captured illumination from the chandeliers overhead, gleaming like a fragment of evidence the supervisor desperately attempted to disregard. "I've served in the banking sector for 15 years, son," the supervisor continued, his tone adopting a lecturing quality. "I recognize fraud instantly. I identify stolen cards on contact, and I comprehend precisely what category of individual would attempt executing a stunt of this nature in my institution." He indicated toward the distant corner of the lobby, not the welcoming waiting zone with its cushioned seating and complimentary refreshments, not the agreeable section where valued patrons relaxed browsing financial publications while awaiting their consultations. No, the supervisor gestured toward the most undesirable location in the entire facility. A corner adjacent to the custodial storage, beside the restroom corridor, where the metal seating was frigid and unwelcoming, where a malfunctioning overhead light produced an irritating buzz like an expiring insect, where every passing individual could observe you positioned there in humiliation, marked as someone unwelcome. "Position yourself there," the supervisor commanded, his voice conveying absolute authority. "Remain stationary, communicate with nobody, don't contemplate departing. I'm contacting corporate headquarters immediately to authenticate this alleged account, and when they inform me of what I already comprehend euros, that this card was stolen, that this account is non-existent, that you're merely a juvenile thief euros, law enforcement will be present." The child walked toward the corner. Each footstep felt increasingly burdensome, as though invisible mass was accumulating on his shoulders with every movement forward. His head drooped downward, his shoulders curved inward, his body attempting to diminish itself, attempting to vanish into the lavish architecture surrounding him. He sensed every gaze in the lobby tracking him, sensed their judgment like tangible pressure compressing his chest. The chandeliers overhead sparkled like celestial objects that would never illuminate for someone of his circumstances. The buffed floors mirrored a realm of affluence and advantage that appeared to exist in a dimension completely removed from his reality. The costly artwork displayed on walls depicted prosperity scenes that seemed to ridicule his deteriorating footwear with every artistic element. He lowered himself onto the frigid metal chair, isolated and separated despite existing among dozens of individuals. The bank maintained its rhythms around him, existence continuing as though he had ceased to exist, as though he had already been eliminated from the premises, as though he represented a problem already resolved. From his jacket compartment, the child retrieved his grandmother's correspondence. The paper had softened from excessive handling. The margins were beginning to deteriorate, mirroring the deterioration of his courage. The ink had diminished somewhat in sections, yet the words remained legible. Words composed by a dying woman who understood precisely what manner of society she was abandoning her grandson to confront. "My courageous child," the correspondence began in unsteady handwriting, "never permit anyone to diminish your worth. You possess more value than they will ever comprehend. Dignity isn't bestowed by others, it's maintained internally. Maintain yours with pride, perpetually with pride." The child absorbed those words 3 iterations, 4 iterations, 5 iterations, attempting to internalize them, attempting to grasp them like rescue equipment in a tempest threatening to submerge him. His grandmother's voice resonated in his recollection, comforting and protective and saturated with affection. Departed now, yet somehow still safeguarding him even from beyond mortality. His mobile device vibrated in his compartment, startling him. A text communication from his guardian, trapped in a business conference across the metropolitan area, attempting desperately to reach the bank as rapidly as traffic conditions permitted. "Delayed in traffic, arriving in 20 minutes, you're performing excellently, she would be incredibly proud." The child nearly smiled. Nearly. He possessed no awareness of how drastically things would transform in those 20 minutes. No awareness that his entire existence was approaching a pivotal shift. No awareness that the individual who had degraded him would soon be requesting mercy that would never materialize. He responded with trembling digits, his thumbs scarcely able to locate the correct keys. Understood, I'm managing, don't be concerned. He was not managing, he was terrified. His cardiovascular system hammered in his thorax as though attempting liberation. However, that's the action you perform when you care for someone. You inform them you're managing so they won't experience anxiety. You transport your own burden so others aren't required to distribute the mass. 20 minutes, merely 20 minutes. What magnitude of transformation could possibly occur in 20 minutes? Everything, absolutely everything. Time advanced forward like an injured creature. 15 minutes elapsed, then 20, then 25. The child remained in his corner position, invisible, disregarded, eliminated from the consciousness of everyone surrounding him. The bank maintained its daily patterns, existence continuing normally, commerce proceeding as though a child wasn't positioned isolated in humiliation near the restroom corridor. Patrons arrived and departed through the rotating entrance. Some walked with determination, confident in their entitlement to presence. Others strolled leisurely, secure in the comprehension that their time held value and the bank would accommodate them. The tellers smiled and executed transactions with practiced proficiency. The coffee apparatus in the corner produced gurgling sounds, filling costly cups for comfortable individuals who never once regarded the small figure positioned isolated in the least desirable seat in the facility. The child observed the supervisor, assisting a Caucasian gentleman in golf attire and casual trousers, establish a brand new commercial account. The gentleman had arrived minimally 15 minutes following the child, perhaps 20, yet he received immediate service, guided to the most comfortable seating, offered premium refreshments, treated like royalty. No inquiries regarding his identity, no suspicion regarding his intentions, no requirements for supplementary identification or evidence of worthiness. Simply smiles and handshakes, and welcome to Liberty Trust Financial, sir. We're absolutely delighted to have you as a valued client, sir. Would you prefer coffee or perhaps filtered water, sir? Permit me to personally guide you through all our elite services. The child observed the head teller delivering the supervisor a steaming beverage from the staff area. They positioned themselves together near the water dispenser, conversing in voices insufficiently loud to comprehend, yet punctuated by amusement. Their eyes continued drifting toward the child's corner. Additional amusement followed each glance. He couldn't comprehend what they were articulating. He didn't require comprehension. The cruelty in their expressions communicated everything. A prosperous woman in designer fashion that probably carried a price exceeding what the child's grandmother had earned in 30 days approached an alternative teller. She deposited a financial instrument, the transaction consuming perhaps 3 minutes from initiation to completion. She departed without even regarding the minority child, positioned isolated near the custodial storage. Her elevated heels clicked against the marble surface, each click a small reminder of his invisibility. Each step away from him, a decision not to perceive, not to care, not to acknowledge his humanity. An elderly woman, perhaps in her 60s, completed her transaction at the primary counter. She differed from the others in some indefinable manner. Something in her features suggested she might possess a conscience buried somewhere beneath the costly accessories and designer handbag. She glanced at the child. Her features tightened with something resembling discomfort, perhaps guilt, perhaps recognition that the occurring situation wasn't appropriate. For one brief instant, the child thought she might approach, might inquire if he was acceptable, might be the solitary individual in this entire facility who demonstrated fundamental human compassion, who advocated for what was appropriate instead of what was comfortable. However, she didn't. Her eyes met his for merely a second. In that second, the child perceived something flicker across her features, recognition of injustice, comprehension of cruelty, knowledge that she should perform something, articulate something, become someone's champion in this moment. Then she averted her gaze. grasped her handbag slightly more firmly against her body, and walked toward the exit with rapid, guilt-laden steps. Her heels clicked against the marble like a countdown, each click a small betrayal, each step away from him a decision to exist comfortably rather than courageously. Each moment of silence a determination to protect herself instead of protecting a child who desperately required someone, anyone, to advocate. The child retrieved his grandmother's correspondence again. The paper had already softened from constant handling. The margins were beginning to deteriorate, mirroring his nerves, mirroring his hope that someone would perceive him as human instead of as a problem requiring removal. He absorbed the words she had composed with such care, such affection, such desperate hope that her grandson would remember his worth when society attempted to convince him he possessed none. You possess more bravery than you believe, more strength than you appear, and more love than you comprehend. His grandmother utilized to recite him that quotation every evening before sleep. She stated a famous author composed it, someone who created stories about bears and friendship, and the simple wisdom originating from kindness. She would smile when she recited it, her aged hands grasping the book gently, her voice comforting and protective, and saturated with promise that tomorrow would be superior, that society would be kinder, that he would mature to accomplish remarkable things. Even bears possess wisdom, she would articulate with a wink, her eyes crinkling at the corners. The child didn't recall the author's designation. He merely recalled her voice, comforting like honey on a frigid morning, protective like a fortress that nothing could penetrate, departed like smoke in the atmosphere, vanished permanently, abandoning him isolated in a society that judged him by his footwear and his skin tone and 1,000 additional factors he couldn't control. His mobile device vibrated again, another text communication from his guardian. Conference extending longer, 15 additional minutes, maintains strength. The child responded with trembling digits that felt like they belonged to someone else. Understood. He didn't mention the amusement that still resonated in his auditory system. He didn't mention the insults that penetrated deeper than any blade could. He didn't mention the manner the supervisor had regarded him like he was refuse requiring disposal before it commenced producing odor. He didn't mention how every individual in this facility, dozens of adults who should have comprehended superior behavior, had selected to exist comfortably rather than kindly. He didn't desire to generate anxiety for his guardian. The individual had already experienced so much, first losing his parent, the child's beloved grandmother, then suddenly becoming responsible for a 10-year-old nephew he barely knew. Then attempting to navigate a society that had never been designed for individuals who resembled them, attempting to construct an existence while transporting the mass of sorrow and responsibility and 1,000 unspoken fears regarding whether he was performing correctly by his parents' memory. 32 minutes had elapsed now, still waiting, still invisible, still isolated with his grandmother's correspondence and the echoes of amusement that wouldn't cease replaying in his cognition. The uniformed guard positioned near the entrance like a sculpture. He was a minority individual, like the child, mid-50s with exhausted eyes that had witnessed excessive amounts of society's casual cruelty. Gray was infiltrating his closely trimmed hair. Deep creases around his mouth articulated years of swallowing words he desired to articulate but couldn't, suppressing responses that might have cost him everything. The guard had witnessed the entire incident from initiation to present. The initial confrontation, the mockery, the insults, the amusement that spread across the lobby like a disease, the manner the supervisor had degraded a child in front of a chamber filled with adults who should have comprehended superior behavior. He had observed it all unfold with increasing horror, a knot tightening in his stomach with each passing moment, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. He desired to advocate. God, he genuinely did. Every fiber of his existence screamed at him to articulate something, perform something, advocate for this child who was experiencing treatment like refuse simply because of his appearance and his attire. His mouth had even opened at one point, the words forming on his tongue, prepared to challenge the supervisor, prepared to defend fundamental human decency. However, then reality crashed back into awareness. The guard possessed a mortgage on a modest residence in a neighborhood that was becoming excessively costly. 2 children in university, their tuition invoices arriving like clockwork every semester, each one a small cardiovascular trauma. 11 years at this bank, slowly constructing toward a pension that would permit him to retire with dignity, that would permit him to finally rest following decades of standing on his extremities, observing other individuals' currency. Silence meant employment. Employment meant survival. Survival meant his own children didn't conclude on the street, didn't have to abandon university, didn't have to relinquish their aspirations because their father selected courage over caution. So the guard averted his gaze, despised himself for it, sensed the mass of his cowardice settle into his bones like a chronic pain, however, averted his gaze anyway. That's what survival performs to you sometimes. It transforms good individuals into cowards. It converts potential champions into silent observers. It instructs you that maintaining your head lowered and your mouth sealed is the price of feeding your family, of maintaining a roof over their heads, of protecting the ones you love, even when it means failing to protect someone else's child. The guard would contemplate this moment for years to arrive, would lie awake at night wondering what might have been different if he discovered the courage to articulate, would transport the guilt like a stone in his thorax, heavy and permanent, a reminder of the day he selected safety over righteousness. Finally, following 32 agonizing minutes of waiting, the supervisor summoned the child over, not to the primary counter where normal patrons were served with respect and proficiency, not to one of the comfortable consultation chambers where important clients discussed their portfolios over complimentary bottled water and artisan refreshments. No, the supervisor gestured to a small workstation in the rear corner, away from the agreeable banking zones, away from the comfortable seating and the beverage station. However, still visible to everyone in the lobby, still on exhibition, like a creature in a zoological display, contained and observed and judged by every passing eye. The child walked to the workstation slowly, his legs feeling weak and unreliable beneath him. He lowered himself into the rigid plastic seating that produced a loud squeak under his mass, the sound appearing to announce his presence to everyone observing. He positioned his grandmother's documents on the workstation carefully, reverently, as though they were constructed from the most fragile glass that might shatter at the slightest rough contact. The supervisor didn't contact them, didn't even regard them. He reclined in his seating with his arms crossed over his thorax, studying the child like a scientist examining a particularly interesting bacteria specimen under a microscope. "Let's attempt this again," the supervisor articulated. His voice was frigid now, stripped of the theatrical mockery from previously, clinical, detached, the voice of an individual performing for the security cameras mounted in every corner of the facility, ensuring his actions would appear justified when reviewed subsequently. "You claim you possess an account at this institution. You claim your grandmother left you resources. However, you appear here with no proper identification, no adult supervision, wearing footwear that resembles something retrieved from a waste container. And you anticipate me to believe you're a legitimate account holder." The child's voice was barely audible, a whisper that could have been transporting away by the slightest breeze. "My grandmother established the account when I was born. She deposited currency in it every single month for 10 years. She maintained 3 employment positions simultaneously. She never expended anything on herself. She wore the same winter coat for 15 years. She utilized public transportation in the rain, even when she was so exhausted she could barely stand. She consumed the most economical food she could locate. Everything existed for me. Every cent was for my education, for my future." The supervisor's lip curved with contempt. "Your grandmother maintained 3 employment positions, performing what precisely? Cleaning residences, washing dishes, processing other individuals' laundry. She was a night shift medical professional at the public hospital," the child articulated quietly, his voice steady despite the tears threatening to emerge. "And affirmative, she cleaned residences on weekends. And affirmative, she processed laundry, because she loved me, because she desired me to possess opportunities she never had, because she was the strongest, most courageous individual I've ever encountered. The supervisor leaned forward, invading the child's space across the workstation. A medical professional, correct. And somehow, with her medical professional's salary and her side occupations, cleaning up following prosperous individuals, she managed to accumulate sufficient resources to qualify for a Diamond Premier account. Do you possess any comprehension what classification of balance that demands? Do you possess any conception of how utterly absurd that sounds? She accumulated for 10 years, the child articulated, his voice shaking now yet still maintaining firm. 10 years of sacrifice, 10 years of articulating no to everything else so she could articulate affirmative to my future. 10 years of selecting me over herself, every single day, every single determination. The supervisor shook his head slowly, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I'll inform you what I think. I think you discovered this card somewhere, perhaps in a wallet you stole on public transportation, perhaps in a handbag you snatched from an elderly woman in the parking structure. Perhaps you're part of some organized ring that targets elderly individuals and takes advantage of them before they expire. I've observed it previously. I comprehend precisely how this operates. Young children, usually from broken homes, get recruited to execute these schemes. They appear innocent, generate sympathy, utilize stolen documents. It's an entire operation. That's not accurate, the child's voice fractured, the words emerging louder than he intended. Heads rotated throughout the lobby. My grandmother gave me this card. She composed me correspondence explaining everything. She instructed me to utilize it for university. She instructed me to never permit anyone to make me feel insignificant or worthless. She instructed me euros. Well, the supervisor interrupted, his voice adopting a sharper edge. Your grandmother should have additionally instructed you not to walk into a bank resembling a street child and anticipate individuals to take you seriously. Image matters in the authentic world, son. Presentation matters. The manner you appear, the manner you dress, the footwear you wear are euros. These elements inform individuals who you are. And right now, you resemble precisely what you are. A charity case at optimal. A thief at worst. Either manner, someone who doesn't belong in an establishment like this. The child retrieved his grandmother's correspondence with trembling hands. He unfolded it carefully, smoothing out the creases with his small digits. She composed this before she expired. Do you desire to absorb it? Do you desire to perceive what she articulated about dignity and worth and how individuals would treat me because of my appearance? The supervisor didn't even glance at the correspondence. His eyes remained fixed on the child's face, frigid and unmoved. I'm certain it's very touching. I'm certain she meant well. However, good intentions don't alter reality. Reality is that you're a 10-year-old minority child in deteriorating footwear attempting to access an account that probably doesn't exist. Reality is that I possess a responsibility to protect this institution from fraud and theft. Reality is that I'm performing my occupation, and my occupation is to articulate no to individuals like you. Individuals like you, the words suspended in the air between them like toxic gas. Everyone in the lobby could hear them. Everyone comprehended precisely what the supervisor meant. The subtext wasn't even subtle anymore. And nobody, not a single soul in that entire facility, advocated to challenge him. Nobody articulated, that's not appropriate. Nobody articulated, you shouldn't converse to a child that manner. Nobody articulated anything at all. The child sat in silence. There was nothing left to articulate. Every word he articulated was twisted and utilized against him. Every piece of evidence he provided was dismissed without consideration. The truth didn't matter in this establishment. Facts didn't matter. Documentation didn't matter. All that mattered was his appearance and where the supervisor presumed he originated from. The supervisor picked up his workstation telephone with deliberate slowness. I'm contacting corporate headquarters right now. They'll authenticate whether this account actually exists. And when they inform me of what I already comprehend are euros, that it doesn't, that this is all a scheme, that you're a frauder euros, you're going to be in a universe of difficulty, son. Fraud is a serious offense, even for children, especially for children who should comprehend superior. He dialed a number with exaggerated precision, ensuring everyone could observe him following proper procedure. He positioned the telephone to his auditory organ and waited, his eyes never departing the child's face, observing for any sign of guilt, any crack in the story, any nervous tell that would confirm what he already believed to be accurate. On the other end of the line, someone in the corporate headquarters picked up. The supervisor provided his employee identification number, his branch location, his clearance code, and then, with deliberate slowness, he recited out the account number from the diamond card positioned on the workstation between them, each digit pronounced with careful clarity. "I need you to authenticate this account immediately," the supervisor articulated into the telephone, his voice adopting an official tone. "I possess a situation here at the branch. A minor, approximately 10 years old, claiming to have inherited access to what appears to be a Diamond Premier account. No adult supervision present, no proper government-issued identification beyond a debit card and some documents that could easily be forgeries. I need full account details transmitted to my terminal, balance information, transaction history, complete account holder information, authorization records, everything available." He waited, his digit tapping impatiently on the workstation. The individual on the other end of the line was clearly accessing the database now, retrieving information, executing verification protocols, checking and cross-checking the numbers. Standard procedure for any suspicious activity, especially involving premium accounts. The supervisor's face remained smug, confident, absolutely certain that in merely a few moments he would be proven accurate. The account would be flagged as stolen or fraudulent. The card would be immediately deactivated. Law enforcement would be contacted. And this little troublemaker would finally receive precisely what he deserved. The child sat perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap, his grandmother's correspondence clutched between his digits like a talisman. He didn't appear afraid anymore. He appeared exhausted, resigned, like he'd already accepted that this was how society operated, that this was what he could anticipate, that this was merely one additional confirmation of lessons his grandmother had attempted to condition him for. However, then something transformed in the supervisor's expression. The smugness began to drain away like water through a sieve. His eyes widened. His jaw went slack. The color started to fade from his face until he appeared almost gray under the harsh fluorescent illumination overhead. "What?" he whispered into the telephone, his voice suddenly uncertain. "That can't be accurate. There must be some error. Check again. Double-check the account number." Whatever the individual on the other end articulated next made the supervisor sit up ramrod straight in his seating. His free hand grasped the edge of the workstation so firmly his knuckles turned white. The telephone trembled slightly against his auditory organ. 750,000, the supervisor's voice fractured on the words, his careful composure shattering. "The account balance is $750,000. That's impossible. There has to be an error in the system." The entire lobby went silent. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every transaction paused mid-keystroke. Every eye turned to the small workstation in the rear corner where a supervisor's entire universe was falling apart in real time. "And the account holder," the supervisor's voice was barely above a whisper now, all the theatrical confidence completely departed. "Who is listed as the primary account holder?" He listened, his face somehow going even paler, the blood draining away until he appeared like he might actually lose consciousness right there at his workstation. The voice on the other end of the line continued, clinical and professional, delivering information that was destroying the supervisor's certainty with every word. The deceased account holder's full legal designation, the date the account was established, the consistent monthly deposits over 10 years, the legal transfer of beneficiary rights, the appointment of a guardian and trust administrator, everything documented, everything legitimate, everything precisely as the child had claimed. "And who is the appointed legal guardian?" The supervisor could barely articulate the words. The answer that came through the telephone made him slump in his seating as though someone had physically struck him in the thorax. His hand holding the telephone dropped slightly, his eyes closed in what resembled physical pain. The voice on the other end of the line provided a designation, the designation of the child's guardian, and then, Following a slight pause, additional information that made everything substantially worse. The guardian's position, his corporation, his professional credentials. One of the largest private wealth management firms in the region. An individual who managed portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. An individual who sat on the boards of major corporations. An individual who possessed the category of power and connections that could destroy a supervisor's career with a single telephone call to the appropriate individual. The supervisor disconnected the telephone with a hand that trembled like a leaf in a hurricane. For an extended moment, he merely sat there, staring at nothing, his cognition clearly racing through all the implications of what he'd merely learned. Then, slowly, he regarded the child positioned across from him. Really regarded him for the first time, perceived past the deteriorating footwear and the excessively large second-hand jacket, perceived past the assumptions and prejudices that had blinded him, perceived the truth he had been excessively ignorant and excessively hateful to perceive previously. This wasn't a street child executing a scheme. This wasn't a thief attempting to access a stolen account. This was the legitimate heir to substantial fortune, the grandson of a woman who had sacrificed everything, accumulated everything, planned everything down to the smallest detail to provide her family a superior future, and the nephew of an individual who could absolutely, without question, terminate the supervisor's career before lunch time. The supervisor initiated, then stopped. His mouth opened and closed, yet no coherent words emerged. What could he possibly articulate? How could he undo what he had performed? How could he retract the insults, the mockery, the cruelty that everyone in this lobby had witnessed? How could he erase the amusement he'd encouraged, the humiliation he'd inflicted on a child? The child simply regarded him, silent, waiting, not gloating, not angry, simply waiting with a patience that appeared far too old for a 10-year-old child, a patience learned from years of having to wait, having to be patient, having to prove himself worthy of fundamental human respect. The supervisor attempted again, his voice shaking. I apologize. It appears there was a misunderstanding, a failure in communication. If you'll merely provide me one moment, I'll retrieve your account information printed out for you immediately, and perhaps we should relocate to one of our private consultation chambers, somewhere more comfortable, more appropriate for a valued client. No, the child articulated quietly, his voice steady now. I'll wait here. My guardian is arriving. He'll desire to communicate with you. The simple statement landed like a death sentence. The supervisor's face crumbled. His hands shook as he rotated to his computer terminal, digits fumbling over the keyboard as he began retrieving account details, printing statements, preparing documents with a desperate urgency as though velocity could somehow undo the damage he'd caused. Behind him, the head teller who had suggested contacting law enforcement stood frozen at her station. Her face had gone pale, the blood draining away as she realized what she had merely participated in. She had assisted humiliating a child, a legitimate patron, someone who possessed more currency in his savings account than she would earn in the next 5 years combined, perhaps the next 10 years. The uniformed guard near the entrance closed his eyes and articulated a silent prayer, knowing he had failed a fundamental test of character, knowing he had stood by and observed injustice unfold without lifting a digit to stop it, knowing that his silence made him complicit in the cruelty he had witnessed. The prosperous woman, who had complained about the child lowering the establishment's standards, suddenly remembered she possessed an urgent appointment she absolutely could not miss. She grabbed her designer handbag and hurried toward the exit, her elevated heels clicking rapidly against the marble surface, desperate to escape before the consequences caught up to her. The young professional who had been filming the entire encounter stared at his smartphone screen, his digit hovering over the delete button. He had recorded himself laughing at a child's humiliation, had captured his own cruelty for posterity, had created evidence of his own moral failure. The realization struck him like a physical blow. Everyone in the lobby possessed a choice in that moment. They could pretend they hadn't participated, could act like they hadn't laughed, hadn't judged, hadn't stood by while a 10-year-old child was treated like refuse, could inform themselves They were good individuals who had simply been mistaken about the situation, who had made an honest error in judgment. Or they could confront the truth. They had failed, every single one of them. They had permitted prejudice and assumptions to guide their actions. They had selected comfort over courage. They had selected silence over advocating. They had selected to protect themselves instead of protecting a child who desperately required someone to advocate for him. And now they had to exist with that choice. The glass entrance at the front of Liberty Trust Financial swung open with sudden force. An individual in an expensive tailored suit walked in, his footwear polished to a mirror shine. He moved with the confidence of someone who had earned their position in society through hard work and intelligence, who knew their own worth and didn't require anyone else's validation to confirm it. His briefcase was leather, worn yet well-maintained, the category that improves with age. His eyes scanned the lobby quickly, efficiently, absorbing the frozen scene, reading the situation in seconds. When he perceived the child positioned at the workstation in the rear corner, his jaw tightened. When he perceived the supervisor's pale face and shaking hands, he comprehended immediately what had occurred. You don't construct a successful career in finance without learning to read individuals, without understanding power dynamics, without recognizing injustice when you perceive it. The individual walked across the lobby, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Every eye followed him, everyone observing, everyone waiting to perceive what would occur next. The click of his footwear against the marble surface sounded like a judge's gavel falling, each step a countdown to judgment. He reached the workstation where his nephew sat, positioned a gentle hand on the child's shoulder, squeezed with a tenderness that articulated genuine affection and care. "Are you acceptable?" he inquired softly, his voice pitched only for the child's auditory organs. The child nodded, regarding up at his guardian with eyes that held both relief and residual fear. "I'm acceptable, just like grandmother trained me. I maintained my position." The guardian's eyes gleamed with pride, yet his jaw remained tight with barely controlled anger. He rotated to confront the supervisor, and when he articulated, his voice was calm, deadly calm, the category of calm that was more terrifying than any amount of shouting could ever be. The category of calm that originates from possessing authentic power and knowing precisely how to utilize it. "I'm the child's legal guardian," he articulated, his words precise and measured. "I believe you've met my nephew. I comprehend there was some confusion regarding his account status." The supervisor stood so rapidly his seating rolled backward and crashed into the workstation behind him with a loud impact. Sir, I sincerely apologize. There was a misunderstanding. Your nephew arrived without proper adult supervision and identification, and I simply followed standard protocol to authenticate his account before providing access. It's institutional policy, you comprehend. We have to be cautious regarding fraud, especially with premium accounts." "Standard protocol," the guardian repeated, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Is it standard protocol to laugh at a child, to designate him a thief in front of a chamber filled with strangers, to mock his deceased grandmother, to make him position himself in the corner like he's being punished for an offense, to refuse him the fundamental dignity and respect you would demonstrate any other patron who walks through those entrances?" The supervisor's mouth opened and closed uselessly. No words emerged. His face cycled through expressions of euros, fear, shame, desperate calculation of euros, yet settled finally on terror as he realized the magnitude of his error. The guardian continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the lobby, ensuring that everyone could hear. "My parent maintained 3 employment positions for 10 years. She was a night shift medical professional at the public hospital. She accumulated every cent she could. She wore the same winter coat through 15 brutal winters because purchasing a new one would have meant taking currency away from my nephew's education account. She utilized public transportation in the pouring rain when she was so exhausted she could barely stand, because possessing an automobile would have meant less currency accumulated. She consumed rice and beans and the most economical food she could locate so that more currency could transfer into that account you merely authenticated." He rotated to address the entire lobby, making eye contact with the patrons who had laughed, the employees who had joined in the mockery. She sacrificed everything so that her grandson would possess opportunities she never had, and you treated him like refuse because of the footwear he was wearing. Footwear she purchased him at a second-hand store for $2 because it was all she could afford at the time. She apologized to him for not being able to purchase superior. She cried that evening because she felt like she had failed him as a guardian. His voice grew harder, colder. However, she hadn't failed him at all. She instructed him something far more valuable than currency could ever purchase. She instructed him dignity. She instructed him to advocate for himself even when everyone surrounding him is attempting to tear him down. She instructed him to transport himself with pride, no matter what anyone else thinks, no matter how they treat him. She instructed him to be strong in the face of cruelty and ignorance. He rotated back to the supervisor, his eyes blazing with controlled fury. You humiliated a 10-year-old child in front of a chamber filled with strangers who should have comprehended superior. You judged him based on his appearance and made vile assumptions based on his race. You failed at the most fundamental requirement of human decency, which is to treat every individual with respect regardless of how they appear or where they originate from or what they're wearing on their extremities. You failed as a professional, as a representative of this institution, and as a human being. The supervisor's voice fractured when he finally managed to articulate, "Sir, please, I made an error, a terrible error. Please, permit me to make this appropriate. Permit me to perceive what I can perform to remedy the situation." "Make it appropriate." The guardian's laugh was bitter and frigid. "You can't make this appropriate. You can't undo what you performed. You can't retract the words you articulated. Every individual in this lobby heard you. Every individual in this lobby perceived how you treated my nephew. And every individual in this lobby will remember this day for the remainder of their existences." Picked up the diamond card from the workstation, holding it elevated for everyone to perceive, permitting the illumination to catch on its surface. "This card represents $750,000, my parents' entire existence savings, 10 years of sacrifice, 10 years of positioning my nephew's future ahead of her own comfort, her own needs, her own desires, 10 years of affection expressed in dollars and cents, in deposited paychecks and denied pleasures and postponed aspirations." The guardian regarded directly at the supervisor, his voice adopting a tone of absolute finality. "This account could have been the foundation of an extended and profitable relationship between my family and this institution. My firm manages over $400 million in assets. I was considering relocating some of our corporate accounts here based on my parents' positive experience with your institution over the years. That recommendation would have brought millions of dollars in commerce to this branch. However, not anymore, not following what you've performed." The supervisor's face crumbled, the full mass of his error crushing down on him. "Please, sir, don't perform this. Permit me to communicate with my supervisor. Permit me to escalate this to the regional director. Permit me to perceive what we can perform to salvage the relationship. I'll be written up. I'll be reprimanded. However, please don't terminate the account. Please don't relocate your commerce elsewhere." "There is nothing to salvage," the guardian articulated with devastating finality. "You made your selection. You selected to humiliate a child based on prejudice and assumptions. You selected cruelty over kindness. You selected mockery over respect. Now you receive to exist with the consequences of that selection." He rotated to his nephew, his voice softening. "Come on, we're departing. We'll locate a superior bank, one that treats its patrons with respect, regardless of how old they are or what they're wearing." The child stood up slowly. He carefully folded his grandmother's correspondence and positioned it back in his jacket compartment, handling it with the reverence of someone holding a sacred text. He picked up the documents from the workstation, organizing them neatly, taking his time. And then, with his head held elevated, his back straight, his shoulders squared with a dignity that appeared impossible for a 10-year-old child, he walked toward the exit with his guardian's hand on his shoulder. Behind them, the lobby remained frozen in a tableau of shame. The supervisor stood at his workstation, his career circling the drain, knowing that word of this incident would spread through the financial community like wildfire. In the tight-knit universe of banking, reputations were everything, and his was now permanently stained with the category of prejudice and poor judgment that no amount of time or distance could erase. The head teller stared at her computer screen, unable to meet anyone's eyes, knowing she would possess nightmares about this day for years to arrive. The uniformed guard wished the surface would open up and swallow him whole, wishing he could return in time and discover the courage he'd failed to summon when it mattered. The prosperous patrons suddenly discovered urgent reasons to depart, not desiring to be associated with what had occurred, not desiring to confront their own complicity in the cruelty they had witnessed and encouraged. Outside on the sidewalk, in the bright afternoon sunlight that appeared almost obscenely cheerful following the darkness of what had occurred inside, the guardian knelt down to his nephew's level. He positioned both hands on the child's shoulders and regarded directly into his eyes. "Are you genuinely acceptable?" he inquired, his voice gentle with concern. "Inform me the truth." The child nodded, and this time there were tears in his eyes, yet they didn't fall. "Grandmother informed me this would occur someday. She informed me individuals would judge me before they knew me. She informed me I would have to be stronger than their hate. She was accurate about everything." The guardian pulled him into a tight embrace, holding him close. "She was perpetually accurate, and she would be so incredibly proud of you today. So proud of how you handled yourself, how you maintained your position, how you maintained your dignity, even when they attempted to take it from you." "I didn't cry," the child articulated into his guardian's shoulder, his voice muffled yet clear. "She instructed me not to cry in front of them. She articulated never permit them perceive they got to you. You performed perfectly. You performed everything appropriate, superior than appropriate." The guardian held him for another moment, permitting the child to take whatever time he required. Then he pulled back, wiping a tear from his own eyes. "What do you articulate? We acquire some frozen dessert, and then we locate you a superior bank, one that deserves your commerce." The child managed a small smile. "Can we acquire the category with cookie dough chunks? Today you can acquire whatever flavor you desire. You've earned it." They walked down the sidewalk together, guardian and nephew, both transporting the mass of a woman's legacy, both honoring her sacrifice, both moving forward with her lessons carved into their hearts like commandments. The child's deteriorating footwear slapped against the concrete with each step, yet he walked with his head elevated, his grandmother's words echoing in his cognition like a protective shield against society's cruelty. The story didn't terminate there, naturally. Stories of this nature never genuinely terminate. They ripple outward like stones thrown into still water. They contact existences in unexpected manners. They force individuals to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the society they've assisted create through their actions or their silence. The young professional who had filmed the incident transferred to his expensive apartment in a trendy neighborhood that evening. He opened a bottle of craft beer and positioned himself on his designer couch, staring at the video on his smartphone. He had meant to post it for amusement, drama at the financial institution, easy engagement, quick viral potential. The algorithm loved conflict and humiliation. His followers would consume it enthusiastically. However, now, observing it back with hours of distance, he perceived something different. He perceived himself in the background, his face visible in the reflection of the glass partition, contorted with amusement. Perceived himself laughing at a child's humiliation. Perceived his own digit pointing, his own expression of entertained cruelty. Perceived the ugliness of his own prejudice reflected back at him in high definition. He observed the video 3 iterations, 4 iterations, 5 iterations. Each viewing made him feel more nauseated, made the knot in his stomach tighten, made the mass of his shame grow heavier. Around midnight, positioned isolated in the darkness, with only the glow of his smartphone screen illuminating his face, he deleted the video. Struck the button. Observed it disappear from his device, from his existence, from his attempt to convert someone else's pain into his own entertainment. However, the guilt remained. It festered. It grew. It wouldn't permit him to sleep. Evening following evening, he lay awake contemplating that day, about that child, about his own failure of character, about what category of individual films a child being humiliated and thinks it's amusing, about what category of society creates individuals like him, individuals who perceive suffering as content, who perceive injustice as entertainment. 3 weeks following the incident, Unable to transport the mass of his silence any longer, he posted something different. Not the video of the child's humiliation, however, a video of his own face, his own confession, his own attempt at redemption, however inadequate it might be. He positioned himself in front of his camera, regarding directly into the lens, articulating to the hundreds of thousands of followers who had arrived to anticipate witty commentary and viral content. "I need to inform you about something that occurred 3 weeks ago," he commenced, his voice shaking slightly. "I was at a financial institution. I observed a supervisor humiliate a 10-year-old minority child for wearing old footwear, for possessing the audacity to attempt to access his own legitimate account. I observed mature adults laugh at this child. I observed him be treated like refuse." He paused, gathering courage, and I laughed too. I filmed it like it was entertainment. I was going to post it for views, for engagement, for likes and comments and shares. I thought it was amusing. I thought it was content. I was incorrect. I was so incredibly, inexcusably incorrect. His eyes grew shiny with unshed tears. That child demonstrated more courage and dignity in those 30 minutes than I've demonstrated in my entire existence. He maintained his position when everyone was against him. He maintained his composure when every adult in that facility failed him, including me, especially me. He leaned closer to the camera, his voice growing more intense. "So this is me articulating I'm sorry, not merely to that child who will probably never perceive this. However, to everyone who's been treated that manner, who's been judged unfairly, who's been laughed at for circumstances beyond their control. And this is me articulating to everyone observing, if you ever perceive something like this occurring, don't be like me, don't observe, don't film, don't laugh, advocate, articulate something. Perform something, because silence makes you complicit, your inaction makes you part of the problem." He positioned himself back, wiping his eyes. "I learned that the hard manner, don't be like me, be superior than me, be the individual that child required someone in that institution to be." He posted the video with shaking hands, fully anticipating his followers to rotate on him, to mock him for his weakness, to criticize him for his sentimentality. He anticipated to lose subscribers, to damage his brand, to hurt his chances at future sponsorships and collaborations. Instead, the video went viral, 3 million views in 5 days, then 5 million, then 10 million, comments flooded in by the thousands, overwhelming his notifications, crashing his inbox, individuals sharing their own stories of being judged unfairly, their own experiences of discrimination, their own shame at remaining silent when they should have advocated, their own promises to perform superior, to be superior, to advocate for others the manner they wished someone had advocated for them. A national conversation initiated, not a comfortable one, not an easy one, however, a necessary one, about bias and assumptions, about the snap judgments we make based on appearance, about how we treat individuals we perceive as possessing less power, less wealth, less value, about the casual cruelty we participate in without even realizing it, the systems of prejudice we support through our silence and our amusement. Major news outlets picked up the story, talk programs discussed it, essays were composed, think pieces were published, social media exploded with debates and discussions and declarations. Some individuals comprehended it, some individuals didn't. However, everyone was conversing, and sometimes that's where transformation commences. The child never perceived the video. His guardian ensured that the youngster had experienced sufficient trauma. He didn't require to relive it, didn't require to perceive himself being mocked and humiliated by strangers, didn't require that permanent record of one of the worst days of his existence. However, the message spread anyway. One small act of honesty, one confession, millions of conversations. Transformation doesn't originate from substantial moments, it originates from countless small ones. This was one of them. 3 days following the incident, the supervisor was summoned into a conference with the regional administrator. It was conducted in a conference chamber on the top floor of the corporate headquarters downtown, all glass walls and expensive furnishings, and the category of calculated intimidation that arrives with power and consequence. The administrator was a woman in her 50s who had constructed her career on attention to detail and zero tolerance for discrimination. She had reviewed the security camera footage, all of it, every angle, every word, every laugh, every moment of the supervisor's systematic humiliation of a child. "I've served in the banking sector for 30 years, she articulated, her voice frigid and professional. "I have perceived numerous errors in judgment, numerous situations where employees failed to meet our standards. However, what I observed on those security cameras was not an error. It was deliberate cruelty. It was systematic prejudice. It was a fundamental failure of human decency." The supervisor attempted to defend himself, attempted to explain, attempted to argue that he was merely following procedure, merely being cautious, merely protecting the institution from potential fraud. "You didn't protect the institution," the administrator interrupted him. "You cost us a $750,000 account. You cost us the potential relationship with a major wealth management firm. You cost us our reputation in the community. And most importantly, you revealed a depth of prejudice that this institution will not tolerate under any circumstances." She slid a document across the table. Termination paperwork, immediate, with cause, no severance package, no letter of recommendation, no chance to resign gracefully and preserve face. "You're terminated," she articulated simply. "Security will escort you to collect your personal items. You possess 30 minutes to clear out your workstation. Your access to all institutional systems has already been revoked. Your company credit cards have been cancelled. Your email account has been deactivated." The supervisor sat in stunned silence. His career, 15 years of climbing the corporate ladder, departed in an instant, erased by one day of permitting his prejudices to overrule his professionalism. "I possess children," he articulated weakly. "I possess a mortgage. I possess obligations. Please provide me another chance. Position me on probation. Permit me to prove I can perform superior." The administrator's expression didn't transform. "You should have contemplated your children and your mortgage before you humiliated a 10-year-old child in front of a chamber filled of individuals. You made your selections. Now you exist with the consequences." Within a week, word had spread throughout the financial industry. The tight-knit universe of banking professionals conversed, and they conversed rapidly. Everyone knew what had occurred. Everyone had perceived the internal memorandums. Everyone had heard about the terminated supervisor who permitted his prejudice to cost his employer a major client relationship. The supervisor attempted to locate another employment position in banking, applied to dozens of positions, sent out hundreds of resumes, contacted every favor he could think of, reached out to every connection he'd constructed over 15 years in the industry. Nobody would hire him. His designation was poison now. The hiring directors who bothered to respond all articulated the same thing in slightly different words. "We don't think you'd be a good cultural fit for our organization. We are transferring in a different direction. Your qualifications don't match our current needs." The authentic message was perpetually the same. "We comprehend what you performed, and we desire nothing to perform with you." 6 months subsequently, he was maintaining employment in retail at a discount department store, assisting patrons locate the appropriate size shirts and directing them to the clearance section. Minimum wage plus a small commission on sales, barely sufficient to cover his obligations. His expensive suits hung in his closet, unworn and obsolete, relics of a career that had been destroyed by his own cruelty. He existed in a studio apartment now, having lost his residence to foreclosure. He utilized public transportation to employment, the same system he had once regarded down on. He shopped at second-hand stores, the same establishments he had mocked. Every evening, he lay awake contemplating that day, replaying it in his cognition like a horror film he couldn't stop observing, wondering how his existence had fallen apart so completely, so rapidly, wondering if he'd ever possess a chance to make it appropriate, knowing deep down that some things can't be made appropriate, can only be existed with and learned from. The head teller who had suggested contacting law enforcement lasted 2 weeks following the incident before she couldn't tolerate it anymore, couldn't confront herself in the mirror, couldn't regard at the child's empty seating in the corner without feeling nauseated to her stomach, couldn't execute transactions without contemplating her own complicity in what had occurred. She submitted her resignation, no dramatic exit, no explanation beyond personal reasons. She merely couldn't labor there anymore, couldn't walk past that corner, couldn't pretend she was a good individual who had simply made an honest error. She accepted employment at a non-profit organization that labored with underprivileged youth. Significantly lower compensation, no benefits package like the institution had offered, no retirement matching. However, something that felt like it might, over years of dedicated labor, commence to balance the scales of what she had performed. She never forgot the child, never forgot the regard on his face when she'd suggested contacting law enforcement on him, never forgot how close she had arrived to being precisely like the supervisor, how thin the line was between her and that category of casual cruelty. She was different now, not perfect, still transporting the mass of what she'd performed. However, genuinely attempting to be superior, to perform superior, to advocate for children who possessed nobody else to advocate for them. The uniformed guard never forgot what he had witnessed, never forgot his own cowardice. The mass of his silence settled into his bones and remained there, a permanent ache that reminded him daily of his failure. 3 years subsequently, when he retired from the institution with his pension finally secured, he didn't disappear into comfortable retirement. He became a school resource officer, a different category of security, protecting children instead of standing by while they were harmed, defending students instead of remaining silent when they required someone to advocate. Every time he advocated for a student, he contemplated the child in deteriorating footwear. Every time he intervened when he perceived injustice, he honored the promise he had made to himself. He never remained silent again, not once, not ever. It didn't erase what he'd failed to perform that day. Nothing could erase that. However, it provided him a manner to exist with it, a manner to honor the lesson he'd learned at such a terrible cost to an innocent child. The elderly woman who had almost advocated but selected silence, instead, joined the institution's newly formed community advisory board 6 months following the incident. The woman who had observed and articulated nothing became a voice for transformation, loudly advocating for superior training, stricter policies, stronger accountability. She volunteered at schools, articulating to students about courage and the cost of silence. She informed them about her own failure, her own moment of cowardice, the selection she regretted every single day. "I was a bystander once," she informed assembly following assembly of young faces. "I perceived something incorrect occurring. I knew it was incorrect. I felt it was incorrect. And I selected to remain quiet because advocating would have been uncomfortable, because I was afraid of making a scene, because I informed myself it wasn't my problem to resolve." She would pause, permitting the mass of her confession to settle over the students. "It's a selection I regret every single day. Don't make my error. When you perceive injustice, advocate. When you perceive someone being treated cruelly, articulate something. When you perceive prejudice and discrimination, stand against it. Your voice matters. Your actions matter. Your selection to articulate or remain silent can transform someone's existence." 8 years elapsed. Time moved forward as it perpetually does, transporting the child with it into young adulthood. The frightened 10-year-old became a confident 18-year-old. The child in deteriorating footwear became a young individual accepted to Stanford University with a full scholarship funded by his grandmother's savings and the legacy she had left behind. On a sun-drenched day in late August, he walked across campus for freshman orientation. Tall now, his frame finally having caught up to his excessively large second-hand jacket from years ago. Confident in a manner that articulated healing and growth and the category of strength that originates from surviving something terrible and emerging the other side. However, he wasn't entirely different from that frightened child. He's still transporting his grandmother's correspondence, laminated now to protect it from wear, tucked safely in his wallet close to his cardiac organ. And on the shelf in his dormitory chamber, carefully displayed like a museum piece, sat a pair of deteriorating sneakers, cracked soles, frayed laces, faded from years of respectful preservation. His roommate noticed them within minutes of moving in, his eyes drawn to the battered footwear that appeared so out of position among the new textbooks and expensive electronics. "Dude, are those your shoes?" the roommate inquired, gesturing at the shelf. "They're completely destroyed. Why do you even maintain them? They appear like they should have been thrown out years ago." The young individual smiled, a gentle expression that held both sadness and pride. "They're the most valuable thing I possess." "Valuable?" His roommate appeared skeptical. "Man, they appear like they belong in a waste container, not on exhibition. Are they like vintage or something, some category of collectible?" The young individual picked up the footwear gently, cradling them in his hands like they were constructed from the most delicate glass. He ran his thumb over the cracked leather, tracing the patterns of wear that informed the story of hard miles walked and tough times endured. "My grandmother purchased these for me when I was 10, he articulated quietly. $2 from a second-hand store. She apologized because she couldn't afford anything superior at the time. She felt terrible about it, cried that evening because she thought she was failing me." He positioned the footwear back on the shelf with careful reverence, positioning them just so. "She accumulated $750,000 for my education, wore the same winter coat for 15 years even when it was falling apart, utilized public transportation in the pouring rain even when she was exhausted, consumed economical food so I could possess a future. Every cent she could spare transferred into my education account." He regarded at his roommate, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "These shoes remind me that affection isn't about what you possess. It's about what you provide. It's about sacrifice. It's about positioning someone else's future ahead of your own comfort. My grandmother was the wealthiest individual I've ever encountered, not because of the currency she accumulated, however, because of the affection she provided." His roommate was quiet for an extended moment, the typical college snark completely absent from his face. "That's actually really beautiful, man, really beautiful. Your grandmother sounds like she was an amazing individual." "Yeah," the young individual articulated softly, touching the footwear one more time like they were a talisman, connecting him to a woman he missed every single day. "She genuinely was." His guardian continued operating his wealth management firm. However, he made significant transformations in how the corporation operated. He initiated a mentorship program for young individuals from underserved communities. Not token positions or photo-op internships, however, authentic compensated opportunities with genuine paths to career advancement. He hired talented individuals who might not have possessed the appropriate connections or the appropriate family background or the appropriate zip code, however, who possessed the intelligence and work ethic to succeed if someone would merely provide them a chance. Talent is distributed equally across all communities, he informed his board of administrators at the conference where he proposed the initiative. Opportunity is not. We possess the power to transform that. We possess the resources to transform that. We possess the moral obligation to transform that. Some board members pushed back, worried about the bottom line, concerned about taking risks on unproven candidates. However, the Guardian held firm, backed by years of success, and the category of moral authority that originates from having existed through discrimination yourself. My parent expended 10 years accumulating every cent so her grandson could possess opportunities she never had, he articulated, his voice leaving no room for argument. The least we can perform is offer that same opportunity to others who possess the talent, however, lack the connections. This isn't charity. This is investment in human potential. This is good commerce and good ethics combined. The Memorial Scholarship, established in his parents' designation, flourished over the years. 18 recipients in 8 years, each one carefully selected not merely for academic achievement, however, for potential, for character, for the category of determination his parent had exemplified throughout her existence. Teachers, counselors, social laborers, all transporting her legacy forward, all instructing future generations about sacrifice and dignity and the power of education to transform existences. Each scholarship recipient was informed the story of a woman who wore the same coat for 15 years so her grandson could possess a superior future. Each one transporting that lesson forward, understanding that their success was constructed on someone else's sacrifice, that they possessed a responsibility to compensate that gift forward. The story of what occurred that day at Liberty Trust Financial spread beyond the immediate participants. It became part of the national conversation about bias and prejudice and the assumptions we make about individuals based on their appearance. Schools utilized it as an instructing tool. Corporations included it in their diversity training. Religious institutions discussed it in sermons about treating others with dignity. It became one of those stories that individuals referenced when they conversed about advocating for what's appropriate, about articulating out against injustice, about the importance of treating every individual with respect regardless of external markers of wealth or status. The story reminded individuals that dignity is not something granted by institutions or bestowed by those with power. It's transporting within each individual, inviolable and inalienable, something that can be disrespected, however, never genuinely taken away. The young individual stood at his dormitory window as the sun set over Stanford, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. Tomorrow, classes would initiate. His future would commence in earnest. His grandmother's sacrifice would commence to bear the fruit she had dreamed of when she made those deposits month following month, year following year. He retrieved her correspondence one more time, absorbed the words he knew by cardiac organ, words that had transporting him through the worst day of his childhood and countless difficult moments since. My courageous child, never permit anyone to make you feel insignificant. You possess more worth than they will ever comprehend. Dignity is not provided by others. It is transporting within yourself. Transport yours with pride, perpetually with pride. He had transporting it through that terrible day at the institution, through the years of growing up without her, through the extended journey that had brought him to this moment, standing in a university dormitory chamber at one of the nation's best universities, his future stretching out before him, full of possibility and promise. His mobile device vibrated, a text communication from his guardian. First day tomorrow, how are you feeling? Nervous, excited, prepared to take on the universe. He smiled, responding, all of the above, however mostly grateful for everything. Your grandmother would be so proud of you. I hope you comprehend that. I comprehend, he responded. I contemplate her every day. She's with me in everything I perform. She's with you perpetually, in your cardiac organ, in your selections, in the strength you transport. Contact me following your first day. I desire to hear all about it. They communicated back and forth for a few more minutes, the easy conversation of family who affection each other deeply. Then the young individual positioned his mobile device down and grabbed his backpack, brand new and expensive, a gift from his guardian for commencing university. However, on his extremities were the old sneakers, not the destroyed ones from the shelf for euros. Those were sacred, preserved, never to be worn again. However, another old pair, comfortable and well-worn, the category of footwear that reminded him where he originated from even as he walked toward where he was transferring. He walked out of his dormitory chamber into his future, transporting his dignity with pride just like his grandmother had instructed him. The campus spread out before him, full of students from every background, every race, every economic class, full of possibility and potential and the promise of education to transform existences. Some individuals would judge him by his footwear, some by his race, some by assumptions they made without knowing anything about him. However, he was prepared for that now. His grandmother had prepared him. That day at the institution had prepared him. He knew his worth, and nobody else's opinion could transform that fundamental truth. Respect is not a reward for success. It's not earned by currency or fancy attire or knowing the appropriate individuals. It's not something that should have to be proven or demonstrated or justified. It's the baseline of humanity, the minimum we owe each other simply by virtue of sharing this universe, this experience of being human, this brief time we possess to make each other's existences superior or worse through our selections and our actions. The child in deteriorating footwear didn't require a powerful guardian or a large inheritance to deserve fundamental decency. Nobody does. However, that day at the institution instructed him an important lesson that he would transport for the remainder of his existence. Some individuals measure your worth by your footwear, some by the balance in your financial account, some by your family designation or your neighborhood or your ability to articulate their language and navigate their cultural codes. A few rare ones measure it by your character, by how you treat others, by the content of who you are rather than the trappings of what you appear to be. Be one of the rare ones. That's what his grandmother had instructed him. That's what that terrible day had reinforced. That's what he would instruct others as he moved through existence with her lessons carved into his cardiac organ like commandments. And if you ever discover yourself in a lobby or a waiting chamber or any public space observing someone be humiliated, inquire yourself a simple question. Which individual do you desire to be? The one who laughed, discovering entertainment in someone else's suffering, the one who filmed it, converting human pain into content for social media, the one who remained silent, selecting personal comfort over moral courage, or the one who advocated, who articulated, this isn't appropriate, who stood up for a stranger because it was the appropriate thing to perform. The selection is perpetually yours. Every day, in small moments and large ones, you make that selection. You determine whether to perpetuate systems of prejudice and casual cruelty or whether to stand against them. You determine whether to be a bystander or an upstander. You determine what category of individual you are through the actions you take when you think nobody important is observing. Dignity is not provided by others. It is transporting within yourself. Transport yours with pride and assist others transport theirs. Advocate for them when they require someone to articulate up. Offer kindness when the universe offers cruelty. Select courage over comfort. That's how we transform the universe. Not through grand gestures or dramatic moments, however through countless small acts of courage and kindness. Through selecting to perceive individuals as individuals rather than as categories or stereotypes. Through treating everyone with the respect and dignity they deserve simply by virtue of being human. One small act at a time, one moment of courage at a time, one selection to perform superior at a time. That's how we honor the memory of individuals like the grandmother who accumulated for 10 years so her grandson could possess a future. That's how we construct a universe where children don't have to endure what that child endured in that institution lobby. That's how we ensure the next youngster in deteriorating footwear walks into a chamber and discovers someone willing to advocate for them, to articulate up for them, to perceive them as valuable and worthy regardless of what they're wearing on their extremities. The selection is perpetually yours. Select dignity, select courage, select kindness. Select to be one of the rare ones.